Margaret had worked as a housekeeper for the Harrison family for nearly 12 years. At 62, she'd seen her share of life's ups and downs, but nothing quite prepared her for what happened that Tuesday morning in November. She arrived at the penthouse apartment just after 8, as she always did. The marble floors gleamed under the chandelier's soft light. Everything seemed normal at first, but then she heard little Thomas crying from the nursery, a desperate, hungry cry that tugged at her heart. Margaret hurried down the hallway, her sensible shoes clicking against the floor. When she opened the nursery door, she found 10-month-old Thomas in his crib, his face red from crying. His diaper needed changing, and his bottle sat empty on the changing table. There, sweetheart," Margaret cooed, lifting him gently into her arms. "Where's your daddy?" She carried Thomas through the apartment, calling out for Mr. Harrison. The silence felt wrong. David Harrison was a devoted father, perhaps too devoted, some might say. Since his wife Elizabeth passed away from cancer 2 years ago, he'd poured all his love into raising Thomas. He would never leave the baby alone. Margaret's hands trembled as she picked up her phone and dialed Mr. Harrison's number. It went straight to voicemail. She tried again, nothing. Then she noticed the morning newspaper on the kitchen counter, still folded. Mr. Harrison always read the paper with his coffee. Her worry deepened. She settled Thomas in his high chair with some mashed bananas and turned on the television, hoping to distract herself while she figured out what to do. The local news was on. Prominent businessman David Harrison was arrested late last night on charges of embezzlement. Prosecutors allege Harrison diverted over $3 million from his company's pension fund. Margaret's heart stopped. She stared at the screen, watching footage of Mr. Harrison being led away in handcuffs. His expression was one of shock and disbelief. "No," she whispered. "That's not right. That's not him." She'd known David Harrison since he was a young man building his business from nothing. She'd watched him care for his dying wife with such tenderness. She'd seen him wake up every night to feed Thomas, refusing to hire a night nurse because he treasured those quiet moments with his son. This man was no thief. But the news continued. Harrison's assets have been frozen pending investigation. His bail hearing is scheduled for this afternoon. Margaret looked at Thomas, who was happily smearing banana across his tray. Her chest tightened with fear. What would happen to this precious child? Mr. Harrison's parents had passed away years ago. Elizabeth's family lived in California and hadn't visited since the funeral. Thomas had no one else. The phone rang, making her jump. She answered it cautiously. "Margaret, thank God." It was David Harrison's voice, strained and exhausted. "I only have a few minutes. They're allowing me one call before the bail hearing." "Mr. Harrison." "What's happening?" "They're saying terrible things on the news." "It's all a mistake, Margaret. A terrible mistake. My business partner, Richard, he's been embezzling funds for years and somehow made it look like I'm responsible. My lawyer says it will take time to sort out, but the evidence will prove my innocence." Margaret heard the desperation in his voice. "How long?" There was a pause. "Days, maybe weeks. I don't know." "Margaret, I need to ask you something, and I understand if you say no. I have no right to ask this of you." She already knew what he was going to say. "Thomas." "Yes, child services. They're going to take him." "Into foster care if there's no one to look after him." "I can't let that happen. I can't let my son go to strangers." His voice cracked. "You're the only person I trust. Could you possibly take care of him until this gets resolved?" Margaret looked at Thomas, who was reaching his chubby hands toward her, wanting to be picked up. She thought of her small apartment across town, her own grown children who'd moved away, her simple life. "Of course I will," she said quietly. "Don't you worry about a thing. I'll keep him safe." "Margaret, I can't pay you right now. My accounts are frozen. I have nothing." "Hush now. This isn't about money. This is about that beautiful boy who needs someone. You just focus on clearing your name." She heard him exhale, a sound of pure relief and gratitude. "Thank you. I've left instructions with my lawyer. He'll be in touch. Margaret, I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me. You just come home to your son." After the call ended, Margaret sat in silence for a long moment. Then she wiped her eyes, squared her shoulders, and got to work. The next few weeks were a blur. Margaret packed up Thomas's clothes, toys, and supplies. She moved them into her modest two-bedroom apartment, converting her sewing room into a nursery. Her daughter Sarah drove up from Philadelphia to help. "Mom, are you sure about this?" Sarah asked, assembling the crib. "You don't know how long this will take." "I'm sure," Margaret said firmly. "That little boy needs stability and love. I have both to give." The community rallied around them in unexpected ways. When word spread about what Margaret was doing, neighbors began dropping off baby food, diapers, and clothes their own grandchildren had outgrown. Mrs. Chen from downstairs babysat when Margaret needed to run errands. Father Murphy from the church organized a fundraiser to help with expenses. "You're doing a brave thing," people told her. But Margaret didn't feel brave. She felt like she was doing what anyone with a heart would do. The media attention was harder to handle. Reporters called, wanting to interview the loyal maid who stood by her employer. Margaret refused them all. This wasn't about publicity or praise. This was about a child who needed her. As the weeks turned into a month, Margaret fell into a gentle rhythm with Thomas. Morning walks to the park, afternoon naps where she'd rock him and hum old lullabies, evening baths filled with splashing and giggles. She read him stories before bed, the same way she'd read to her own children decades ago. Thomas thrived under her care. His smile came easily. He took his first steps holding onto her hands, and when he fell, she was there to catch him. At night, when he cried for his father, she held him close and whispered, "Daddy loves you so much. He's coming home soon." She visited David twice at the county jail. The man she saw there looked older, worn down by stress and worry. But when she showed him photos of Thomas on her phone, Thomas laughing, Thomas eating, Thomas sleeping peacefully, his face transformed with joy and relief. "He's happy," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you, Margaret. Thank you for giving him that." "He misses you," she said gently. "But he's okay. Children are resilient. I don't deserve your kindness." "Nonsense. You're a good father and a good man. The truth will come out." And slowly it did. David's lawyer uncovered evidence, emails, financial records, testimony from other employees that proved Richard had orchestrated the entire scheme. He'd forged David's signature, manipulated accounts, and planned to flee the country with the stolen money before he was caught. 7 weeks after David's arrest, all charges were dropped. Margaret was feeding Thomas his lunch when the call came. Her hands shook as she answered. "Margaret, I'm coming home. I'm free." She closed her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "Oh, thank God, thank God. Would it be all right if I came to see Thomas this afternoon? I know he must be napping. You come whenever you're ready. We'll be here." 3 hours later, there was a knock at her door. Margaret opened it to find David Harrison standing there, no longer in prison clothes, but dressed simply in jeans and a sweater. He looked thinner, older, but his eyes held hope. "He's sleeping," Margaret said softly, stepping aside. "But he'll wake soon." David walked into the small apartment, taking in the makeshift nursery, the toys scattered across the floor, the photos of Thomas that Margaret had hung on the walls. His eyes filled with tears. "You made him a home. It's not fancy. It's perfect." He turned to her, his voice breaking. "How can I ever repay you?" Margaret shook her head. "You don't owe me anything. I love that little boy. I've loved him since the day he was born." They heard a small cry from the nursery. Thomas was waking up. "Go on," Margaret urged. "Go to your son." She watched as David walked to the nursery door and pushed it open. She heard Thomas's confused whimper, then a pause, then a joyful squeal. "Dada, dada!" Margaret smiled through her tears, listening to the sound of father and son reunited. She quietly gathered Thomas's things, preparing to help them transition back to their own home. But David appeared in the doorway, holding Thomas, both of them with tears on their faces. "Margaret, I've been thinking. My company, I'm going to rebuild it with new partners, honest ones. But it's going to take time, and Thomas needs consistency. He needs you. I'll visit whenever you like." "No, I mean, would you consider being more than a housekeeper? Being part of our family? Officially. We need you, Margaret. Both of us." Margaret looked at Thomas, who was reaching for her while still clinging to his father. She thought about returning to her quiet apartment, her orderly life. But then she thought about morning walks in the park, Afternoon stories, evening lullabies. She thought about love, which had no price and required no contracts. "Well," she said, taking Thomas's small hand in hers, "I suppose someone needs to make sure you two eat properly." David laughed, a real laugh for the first time in 2 months. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes." And so Margaret became not just a housekeeper, but family. She moved into the guest room at the penthouse. She was there when Thomas said his first words. She was there for birthday parties and scraped knees and bedtime stories. She became Grandma Margaret, the most important title she'd ever held. Years later, people would ask her why she did it, why she risked everything for someone else's child. Margaret's answer was always simple: because he needed me. And sometimes that's reason enough. In a world that often moves too fast, that sometimes forgets the value of simple kindness, Margaret's choice reminds us that courage isn't always loud or dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet and steady. Sometimes it's just showing up, day after day, for someone who needs you. And sometimes that's the bravest thing of all.